Good Friday morning, and welcome back to another episode of Finding God in the Dark, the podcast. I am feeling much better. Thank you all for your prayers, and also for my family, who this thing went all the way through the household, except for my youngest son, never got sick. But
Oh wow.
I'm Don Stevens, serving Asbury UMC in Woodstown, St. John's in Harrisonville. Jonathan?
And I'm Jonathan Campbell. I'm the pastor of Lacey United Methodist Church.
And this week we watched we're going to call it a historical drama
Mm.
from Angel Studios called Bonhoeffer, uh, Pastor Spy Assassin. Very glorified title
Yeah.
for someone who, I think honestly we both kind of mentioned this, is really almost a modern hero of Christian faith,
Oh
right?
yeah. He's one of the great. He's one of the great people of the faith, especially for the last 100 years. Like there's
Yeah.
very
Now
little
this
about
film
that.
stars Jonas Dassler as Bonhoeffer. It's directed and written by Todd Komarnicki. It comes from Angel Studios, who are the same people who gave us Sound of Freedom last year, which
Mm.
is a really intense film. If you happen to, have any desire to see that, it's about child trafficking, international child trafficking. This is about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, German Lutheran pastor and theologian
Yeah.
during World War II, primarily.
Yeah.
Um, where do we want to jump off on this one, Jonathan?
Well, we talked a little bit before the taping. The movie's a good movie, and it really can spark your interest in Bonhoeffer. I want to talk about the last scene because I thought it was really well done. Um,
Yeah,
but
okay.
but there are a
I don't
lot
want to
there.
talk.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about the like that last segment where
Oh,
they're in the prison
yes.
before
Yeah.
they know he's going to
Yeah.
be executed, and they
Yeah.
serve you. I don't want to talk about that because I just tried talking about it a little while ago with somebody from church, and I
I
started
know.
getting choked up.
I got very choked up. This is how much of a loser pastor I am. Any good communion scene, you have me. Just like I'm like, okay.
We're simpatico on that one, buddy. Right there.
Um, but there are a lot of there are a lot of issues, and there's some concerning mishandling of his theology and his
Yeah,
life, to be
yeah,
honest.
yeah.
And so we need to talk about that as well. So,
Well, I think one of the things that I heard constantly, of course, I do a little research after I see the film, right? One of the things I heard constantly come up was how they had compressed some things for, I guess,
mhm,
for time's sake in the
of
film,
course,
right? But this
yeah,
this whole time when he was actually working sort of as a double agent
yeah,
with the Nazis, that's maybe 5 minutes of the film,
yeah,
and it was 4 years of his
yeah,
life,
yeah,
that kind of thing.
yeah. And the same thing with he was at Union for a fellowship for for a little over a year, and it had a huge impact on him. But that section is given a lot more time than his actual work. See, essentially he was sending information to, and that's another problem issue with the movie is he doesn't send information to the United Kingdom government. He was sending information to church sources in Europe. That's what he was doing. So,
Right. I mean, I think it's important to say up front that it is a great film. I think it's a really well done film. It's
it is.
well acted. The main character, the fellow who plays Bonhoeffer,
Yeah.
spot on, I
Yeah.
thought. It's moving,
Absolutely.
particularly I think for people of Christian faith, but as pastors and sort of local church theologians, which is
Yeah.
what we are. It hit a lot of the right chords.
Yeah.
But I think that there are some things that it's, it missed the mark as well in
Yeah.
places. I think you should talk about that one, the one thing you mentioned before we started taping. and about the self-sacrifice part.
Oh, yes. Probably his most notable quote, there's probably two. One is that faithful Christians sometimes must throw themselves into the spoke of the wheel of power. I'm not giving you the full quote, but that's kind of the essence of the quote. The second quote he's probably known for the most is, "When Christ calls a man, he calls the man to die." And that was part of a sermon he gave. That is a very big part of his theology. So
Hmm.
I don't know if he labeled it this, but later on, later theologians would call his theology oftentimes the theology of the cross. And he believed that we needed to understand our life as Christians as primarily people who are called to sacrifice for the good of community and the good of the church and the good of others. And he really believed that, and he believed that we were called to do that. And that's a powerful scene and a powerful statement, of course, and a really powerful sermon. I'm not sure if they gave it word for word, but it sounded similar to what I've heard before.
Yeah.
But they interspersed the actor powerfully giving this sermon with another person strapping a bomb to themselves, hoping to blow themselves up and Hitler up.
Right.
And that's a big problem. And so let's talk about this briefly. Um, we'll never know everything exactly because, of course, it's 80 years ago and a
Yeah,
lot of
and a
this
lot
stuff
of the
is,
details get
yeah,
lost to history.
and
Yeah.
a lot of this details were secret. But there is no evidence that he participated actively in planning an assassination attempt on Hitler. It's probably it's very probable he knew about assassination attempts because his brother-in-law was working with a group that was trying to plan one. But there's no evidence he participated in that or planned it. And the movie implies that he met with a UK government official and asked for a bomb. That never happened. What he did was he worked in the German government and he stole documents and sent information to church sources who then passed it to their governmental sources. That did happen. He was a saboteur, really. He was trying to destroy the military achievements of the Nazi government. That was definitely what he was trying to do. He
Right.
also helped launder money to pay Switzerland to accept Jewish folks trying to escape. Those are the
Which
two
they
things.
did show. Yeah.
Yes, those are the two things he was arrested for, and two things he was really killed for. And those things are significant and should have been talked about, I would argue, in the film more. Honestly, the title of the film, the last word assassin really should be taken out on the poster. He also is carrying a gun. That's an issue. You know,
Well, I mean, he's a self-avowed pacifist,
yes. Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And they do mention that in the film,
Yeah.
but I think what they've done here is they've taken, if you will, creative license. They've taken
Yes.
some liberties with the story to try to make it more of a thriller,
Yes.
which I don't know. I think the story is valuable enough without having to go to
Yes.
that place.
I would argue that I think it would have been a better film had they done two things. Talked a little bit more about his impact as a theologian because he deeply impacted Dr. King and he deeply impacted Desmond Tutu in South Africa.
Hmm.
Both the civil rights movement in the United States in terms of structure and theology and ethical behavior. Same thing for the work done in South Africa by the Anglican Church. They
Hmm.
were deeply shaped by his work and his theology and his ethics. You
Right.
know,
And I think that is particularly when we talk about his ethics and real you get the sense from the film that
you know,
he really tried to live.
Yes.
Like we talk as pastors, we talk about it. We preach about, living a Christian life, but it seems like Bonhoeffer laid aside everything to
Yep.
live a Christian life.
Yeah.
Even given now, I don't know again how true, how much creative license was taken here, but even given the opportunity to escape at the last minute.
Yes. Which happened, which actually did happen.
Okay, so did happen. He said, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to, this is where I'm meant to be."
He essentially said from account basically they show some of this I feel like the prison they do better than any other part of the movie. And again, I'm not a Bonhoeffer expert, but I love the man's theology. He's had a huge impact on my life. I've read a lot about him, and I've read a lot of his work, so take that for what that's worth. But he really became the chaplain of both the prisoners and a lot of the guards. And that led to one guard, after they found out that he was going to be executed the next morning, one guard took it upon himself to say, I will get you out. I will sneak you out, and I'll help you escape. And his response was, everybody deserves to escape. Everybody deserves to be let out. I'm not going to, this is what God has called me, and I made this basically the movie does a good job of saying basically what he would have, I think in a lot of ways he would have said. He said, "Look, I made a choice in 1933,
He
and
says
this is
12 years ago in the film. He
yeah,
said 12 years ago I made a
yeah,
choice. Yeah.
and this is where it has ended, but this is all of this is where God has called me to be." And that was just very much, he is really a great hero of the faith. I mean, he just is. And there's a lot we can learn from him. The problem is both progressive and conservative Christians oftentimes don't allow him to be him and don't allow the messiness, because he isn't a progressive and he isn't a evangelical.
Right.
He is his own person. And there are things that resonate with really conservative Christians that he did and said and believed, but there's also things that he did, said, and believed that really resonate with progressive Christians. And what I think you should really let him do is challenge you and enliven you, and not dismiss the stuff that is challenging. So,
And I think his life speaks to, and his writings and his teachings, right,
yeah,
speak to something that we've talked about before, particularly I think when we talked about primary colors, in
yeah,
that, there's no perfect candidates,
yeah,
and that our job as Christians, again, this is a Bonhoeffer idea, right,
yeah.
is no matter who's leading, no matter who wins an election, no matter who is in charge, our job is to hold their feet to the fire.
The church is always supposed to be a organization that pushes the governments that they're under to live the most ethical and uh, you know Christ-like way they can be, recognizing that they're never going to meet that standard, but it's our job to keep pushing them. And that's part of the issue I have with some conservative Christians, is sometimes they're not critical of what the United States does, and that's not what a Christian's supposed to do. The country is not our ultimate. Um, the United States is not our ultimate savior, and it's not our ultimate loyalty to. Our ultimate loyalty is to Christ and to Christ's vision of what life's supposed to be. And the United States, Democrat or Republican, is never going to live up to that. And so the church always has work to push against the things that the government is doing wrong.
Yeah, it seems that if you could boil Bonhoeffer's response to the government down to two words, it would be do better.
Yeah.
You know? It's,
You know, and
it's
it's important to note his theology of resistance is something that he worked out and struggled with. One book, this is a heavy read. This is considered his greatest theological work. It's called
yeah.
Ethics. He never finished it. He died before he could. But he nuances resistance in terms of what would be right for an individual, what would be right for the preaching office of the church, and what would be right for the for a large governmental organization to push against and to resist evil in the world. And
let's
so he,
let's let's
yeah,
also let's also I think you bring the heavy read,
yeah,
okay? Like
yeah,
ethics, that's an
yeah.
intense book.
Yes.
If you have not ever read any Bonhoeffer,
Start
start
here.
there. Start with Life Together. That's the
And
one to start with.
And what's powerful about this, I would actually, I don't know how many clergy are watching, but I've actually read this with a group of people in churches. It's a wonderful experience to read with your church. He wrote this to help the underground seminary that he was running to function and to think about the deep issues about what it means to be Christians and what it means to live as Christians in community. And so this is a wonderful read. It's short and it
Has that
really is
been
powerful.
reprinted yet? I know it was out of print for a long while.
I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah.
The other thing is his probably most famous work is The Cost of Discipleship. He
Yeah.
breaks down the Sermon on the Mount. It's a heavy read, but it's also a wonderful read.
That's
Um,
that one's not as big. That one's not as heavy
yeah,
as ethics.
yeah.
Ethics is rough.
Ethics is where he just smashes it down, right?
That's
But
intense. Yeah.
but what I wanted to what I want to mention is this theology of resistance that he develops in the movie. It seems like he's like, well, Hitler's a problem. Let's just throw all the cross stuff out, and that's not how Bonhoeffer would have done it, and
Well,
that's not how
there
he did
was
it.
there was literally a scene where,
Yeah,
he's part of this, they're planning this assassination, and the one of the students from the seminary, the only other student that apparently
yeah,
wasn't there when they
yeah,
raided the seminary, right, that was with
yeah,
him, says to him, but you're an avowed pacifist. You wouldn't, you think it's the job of the church to not get involved in this. And he literally said, the character said, I don't
yeah,
think Bonhoeffer actually said
yeah,
this, but the
yeah,
character said, well, there's never been an opportunity for me to do this before. I
yeah,
couldn't have, there wasn't a Hitler before.
yeah. Well, and yeah, then there's this section where he goes, "We got to do more than just preach and teach," and I'm like, he wouldn't have said that either.
Yeah.
Um, but I think what's important, especially when we want to nuance his discussion around theology of resistance and what impacted both Dr. King and Desmond Tutu in their work, was he believed that responding violently to violence was the fuel that drove tyrants and evil. And so he argued that what you really have to do is wear them out. So essentially, you have to keep throwing yourself in front of the evil and not fight back in terms of violence because that's what evil wants is what it wants more violence, it wants more hatred, all that kind of stuff. And that idea of basically continuing to stand up and take another punch and continuing to stand up and take another punch, not be moved, but stand up and take another punch, that theological idea, you can see the fruits of that in the American Civil Rights Act, in the American Civil Rights Movement and in what happened in South Africa in terms of what the church did, is they kept standing up. They would not be moved by the oppressive government, but they kept standing up and taking another punch, going down, standing up, taking another punch, that kind of thing. And that is part of his theology that if you just saw this movie, you would assume he would basically balled that up and threw that away and went like Hitler's special, and that's
Like,
not
this
Bonhoeffer.
is different.
This
This
is
guy's
different.
got a little mustache.
Yes. Yeah, and again, why this concerns me is his theology is not about, well, we have a really tough problem that theology can't answer or that following Christ can't answer. He believed every question could be answered by following Christ. Every question could be answered by really understanding and living into the cross, which meant suffering. But like that was his theology, and he never gave that up. And he never threw that away and never said, well, Hitler's special. And those kind of things, if again, most people aren't going to read his work, and most people aren't going to, and it makes it seem like, well, Christians need to be practical, and there's some truth to that, but Christians can, if the situation's bad enough, we can stop following Christ, and that's not what he taught, and that's not how he lived.
Yeah, I did come across at least one like scholarly paper that talked about someone went in depth kind of into his letters from prison and stuff like that, and how towards the end he was very anti-organized religion,
Mhm.
anti the church,
Yeah,
and even to the point of almost throwing away the Bible and just saying, I need to follow Christ, period.
yeah,
Now, my pushback on that would be I don't know how it is you follow
yeah,
Christ without the scriptures,
yeah.
but I understand where you're going.
Well, I think again, you can critique him. It wasn't perfect, but
And that's the important thing, isn't it?
yeah,
That we understand he is a martyr.
yeah,
He is I think a Christian hero, but like any human being, he too broken,
yeah. He
like
is a,
all of us.
he is a saint, but at the same time, he's not perfect because no human being is.
Right.
What I would say is that his critique of organized religion is very prescient and very, very useful today, I think, because as local churches, especially, and even on the denominational level, we have a tendency to forget a lot of times that we're not supposed to sustain the structure for the sake of the structure. We're not supposed to sustain the church for the sake of the church. We're supposed to help the church do its mission, which is
Yeah.
proclaim the life of Jesus Christ in both deed and prayer and action. And so that is very fair and something that we should learn about, because oftentimes, I mean, what happened with the church in Germany, where most German Lutheran Christians just basically accepted Hitler as the head of the church, you know, that is, that's Christian nationalism. That's something that even Americans right now, a lot of American Christians are struggling with. And it's not what we're called to do. We're not called to follow anybody but Christ. And so the church sometimes, my guess is a lot of people in the German church chose to follow Hitler because they wanted to survive. They wanted to keep their jobs. They wanted to not go into prison and concentration camps. And I totally get that. But at the same time, that is not what the church is called to do. The church is called to follow Jesus. And sometimes that can lead you to standing up against your nation and what the nation wants to do.
It's it's interesting. I think this film went along. I think the big angle that it took towards, particularly at the end of the film,
Mm,
if you saw the scroll at the end of the film, the
yeah.
real angle it took was a stand against anti-Semitism.
Yes.
Um, and so that was kind of the kind of the ultimate goal of the film.
Yeah.
But I think it stands well as a testament to at least some pretty significant parts of Bonhoeffer's life and of his theology and of his
Yeah.
teaching. I was intrigued that I didn't catch it early on
Mhm.
until his mentor, the bishop,
Mhm.
was Martin Niemöller,
Yeah.
who is infamous, for those who don't know that name, infamous for that quote about first they came for the trade unionists and I wasn't a trade unionist, so
I said
I didn't
nothing.
say anything. And, eventually they came for the Jews and I wasn't a Jew and I didn't say anything. And eventually they came for me and there was no one to say anything.
Yeah.
Um, that was an interesting angle that I was not aware of.
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, overall,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think the film's worth seeing, but
Yes.
understand that it is even though Angel Studios made it, it is still a Hollywood film. They are still trying to make a thriller.
Yeah.
I think it's actually listed as a thriller.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's more of a talkie movie, but
Yeah.
you know,
Well, and again, like the Barman Declaration was not just Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and
right?
I assume the guy writing his notes down was supposed to be Karl Barth. Again, Karl Barth was a bigger piece of this. They and others
Yeah.
worked together for this declaration. This was a declaration that basically said this group of German Christians, they were saying we're following Christ, we can't follow Hitler, and they were saying what I think is true and powerful. You can't be a Nazi and a Christian. You have to choose. And that is a powerful statement that more Christians need to take seriously, is that we have to follow Christ before we follow anything else. And oftentimes that can mean you have to be critical of your government, and you even have to sometimes stand up against your government. And I think for a lot of Christians, at least in America, that's really hard to do. We have a bad tendency of wrapping the cross in the flag, and there's a real danger there.
And I agree with you. I think that, we have to be discerning, right? We
Yeah,
have to be discerning about how, like when you look at the government and its foundation and we talk about that idea of separation of church and state, it
yeah,
really wasn't about getting the church out of the government. It was more about getting the government out of the church,
yes.
right? The church still, even with the founding fathers, the church still had a responsibility to hold the government accountable to Christian ethics.
And that's where the church really shines, is we always have to be we have to engage with the government, but we always have to be willing to be critical of the government in whatever, even when it's doing things that we believe fulfill the kingdom of God, we still have to be critical of other things it's doing. We have to do both. We have to support it when it's doing something well, but not blindly support it so we ignore what it's doing that is cutting against the truth of Jesus's message.
Percent. So we're gonna have to start wrapping up because we've got
Real briefly
go
though,
ahead. Go.
I honestly think the last 5 minutes of this movie is literally the reason why I encourage my churches to do weekly communion and to embrace the power of God's grace we find in communion. Because that whole scene around, he gives communion to the prisoners and a guard in the prison he's waiting to be executed in, when he knows he's going to be executed. And that is that whole moment is why communion is that gift from God that we're called to embrace and truly understand that the Spirit moves through. And to me, that's the scene you show people when you're like, that's why we need to do communion every week.
I'm I'm gonna guess that you were probably, did you go to a theater that had the reclining seats?
I did,
Okay.
and yes, I
So
I
I'm
I
sitting in the
kept
reclining seat, right?
yeah.
And that scene is on, and it was a smaller theater, and there were only about six of us in there. And I'm watching it, and the tears are just running down my
Oh
face.
yeah, I was doing my best not to cry, but my throat, I couldn't have talked. Oh, that was to me, that was the best scene in the movie by far.
Yeah. No, I agree. 100% agree. Yeah. If you see this film for nothing else,
Yeah,
go for
that's
that last 5 minutes because wow,
and if you want
powerful.
recommendations for Bonhoeffer or to talk about Bonhoeffer, please reach out to either of us, and we'll be glad to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
100% on that. Absolutely. So let's talk about what we'll watch next week. Now, I have to tell you, I did invite our new bishop
yeah,
to join with us. Now, she is willing to come on whenever
yeah.
we're planning further out.
Okay.
So, we can fit her into the schedule. I told her normally we go from week to week, but we'll see what happens.
What I'm thinking is why don't we're not going to do this right now, obviously, but why don't the two of us, and if Evan wants to be involved, that would be great too. Why don't we give her like 4 or 5 movie suggestions and then say, tell us when you could do this, and we would love to have you on and talk about this movie.
That's a great idea. That's really a great idea. So we'll discuss that
Yeah.
when we're not recording.
Yeah.
For now, we got to talk about next week. Now,
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to jump into Christmas movies because we're
I
in.
definitely think we should. Yeah.
Okay. I have a thought. I don't know if you've seen this one. It's on Netflix. It's actually been nominated as Best Animated Film. Have you seen Klaus?
No.
Oh, you got to see Klaus.
Okay.
Okay, it's on Netflix right
Okay.
now. It's my of all my children, my older son, the football player. It's like his favorite Christmas movie. He's watched it 3 or 4 times already this year.
Okay.
So it's a really, it's a good movie.
Yeah.
We'll leave it at that. And but it's spelled Klaus, Klaus. It's on Netflix. I'll
Cool.
watch it again because I enjoy it. It's a fun film. So,
Absolutely. Okay.
and we'll talk about that next week.
Sounds good.
Until then, friends, you see the books, pick up the books.
Yes.
Start with Life Together.
Yes. So, yeah.
Start with Life Together.
Life Together, if you can get it, is worth a read.
You get
It's
your
it's
hands
a
on it. You can probably
wonderful
get a used
discussion.
copy on Amazon, but start with
Then,
that.
then go to this,
Yeah,
Cost of Discipleship. Then I would encourage you to read his prison letters. They're very powerful. They're moving. They're sad, but they're
yeah,
great. And
yeah.
then the graduate level course is this. So ethics. So there you go.
It's level course. Indeed. All right, friends. Until next week, keep on finding God in the dark. We will see you all. Good. God bless.
Bye.
Thanks for watching the Finding God in the Dark podcast. If you're enjoying these discussions, please consider hitting the like button down below or subscribing to follow along. We put out weekly episodes on Friday mornings, and we are so glad that you're finding this discussion of theology and film entertaining enough to follow along with us. Take care and God bless, friends.